Welcome inside another edition of Mountaineer Report, brought to you by WV Sports Now, and a semi-forced upon edition of the show. Not that we wouldn't want to do a show anyway, try to promise at least one of these per week, if not more. But there's a lot going on, football and basketball, and even around Mountaineer athletics. Baseball, of course, still winning. But a head coach of a program in West Virginia, not a WVU program, but a head coach of Marshall, Tony Gibson, a former Mountaineer, a man that WVU fans know very, very well, managed to force another debate between West Virginia and Marshall and if they should play in football. They play in other sports, if they should play in football, as Tony Gibson apparently will not let this go, which means we are going to have to. I tried to avoid this. We're going to have to talk about it here on Mountaineer Report. Mike Asti here, and joined as always by Cody Nespor. Cody, how are you, man?
Hey, good. Enjoying the weather now.
Yeah, the weather finally is cooperating. Were you surprised in any way before we fully get into it? Because we're also going to talk maybe some on the roster. The Tony Gibson just beats this drum to death. It almost appears, I said to you off the air, it almost appears that trying to refuel a quote-unquote rivalry, if you think it was one, between the Mountaineers and Thundering Herd on the gridiron has become his mission, even more so than winning games. Like, no one's talking about their roster and players that need to come aboard and their lack of depth and all the players they lost in the portal, and it's conversation about Marshall, local or nationally, is all about this. It's almost like a nice smoke screen, but it seems like that's his focus. I know he brought this up about a month ago. Did you think we'd hear this again?
I guess not, because, since the last time they played a dozen years ago, nobody has really made a push.
Right.
And so and we're going to get into this later, I'm sure, but I agree with Tony Gibson.
I figured you would. I thought we would potentially argue about this, but
I kind of like that he's going to seemingly take up this mantle and try to push for this game where nobody has pushed for it, in the last decade. And I don't, what becomes of it is unknown, but I like that he's willing to kind of take it on and I don't know, even if everybody disagrees with him, be a dissenting voice. And like I said, be the guy that's going to push for this, because there hasn't,
no, Huff didn't bring this up. It wasn't really brought up before. Obviously, they play in other sports. They had the basketball, the men's basketball separation, but that was pretty much anyone you can ask. That was largely because of Huggins and D'Antoni did not get along at all.
Yeah.
And Huggins had no interest in helping them. And now with Huggins gone and D'Antoni gone, they're still not playing. They do play in the minor sports, but there's been nobody to really bring this up on either side of the coin in football. And when he brought this up before, now, of course, Rich Rod doesn't have another press conference lined up. Spring ball is over for the Mountaineers. They were just wrapping things up in kind of their post-spring session with Tony Gibson when he did mention this. But Rich Rod immediately tried to dismiss it. There was even a joke at the intro presser thrown out there. And every time someone mentions Marshall, he just says, I'm not thinking about them, tries to move on. He doesn't even want to give it a yes or no. Ren has not even fully answered this either. So Tony Gibson is single-handedly making this a conversation that the media are having to cover on both sides, and that we're talking about this right now. If not for him bringing this up now twice since he got the job, this would likely not be in the conversation anywhere.
Yeah, and I think, I don't think it's, even if you're the most vehemently disagree with it and think it's stupid and it is never going to happen and should never happen, I don't even think it's a bad thing to have in the public debate in the state, because like I said,
I could see that part.
Like for 12 years, nobody's talked about it. Like I said, and even in basketball, like I don't know off the top of my head the last time they played, but it's been a while, and nobody really pushes for that game either.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't know. I think it's of all the random sports debates that could go on, I think this is one of the most productive or one of at least the least destructive, right? That we could actually have and people on both sides could have disagreements about.
Yeah, it does get toxic if you argue about it too long. Like I go back and forth a little bit sometimes on social media, but if you let that linger more than an hour, you're getting into some toxic conversations. And I will actually say, I do think the Marshall fans are the ones that get toxic in this debate. They get really mad, whereas the West Virginia fans mostly dismiss this. There are some that do want to play this, but they don't push it as much. And maybe this also helps Gibson ingratiate himself to that fan base, because the only people that have been bringing this up the past decade basically are from a small minority of Marshall fans.
Mm-hmm.
West Virginia fans do not want to bring this up, whether they were good or bad. They don't want to bring this up. None of the Mountaineer coaches want to bring this up. Rich Rod looks like he's annoyed that he has to be the one discussing this. Neil Brown did not get one question about playing Marshall in 6 years outside of a scrimmage, which he said he would do. And I think Rich Rod maybe even would do that. And we talked about the end of spring games and maybe doing that instead of the showcase event on our last show. But in terms of actually putting them on the schedule, this is, I mean, Ren Baker's talked about the schedule so often that it's almost annoying, and rarely does Marshall get part of that. He said he'll do the group of 5 as one of the games, but rarely do we even push the Marshall question. So it is interesting that Gibson's made this his mission. I do find it interesting, Cody, and we will fully get into this now. Gibson's an odd messenger. It makes sense maybe why he wants to do this, because he's been a Mountaineer lifer, so he maybe feels like this connects him to Marshall a little bit, because maybe some Marshall fans didn't like hiring a WVU guy, for example. But there's some hypocrisy there that I've seen some people dig some. If you look at quotes from when he was an assistant or way back there, he was right on board with dismissing Marshall. Why ever play them? Beating them means nothing. There's a lot of quotes from him back in the day saying that stuff. So it is interesting now if he would be that guy. Cody Nespor again, Mike Asti here. Mountaineer Report, WV Sports Now, as we were talking, if West Virginia should play Marshall on the gridiron, and that really is the conversation, not in all sports, but in football in particular. Find us everywhere you get your podcasts. Mountaineer Report is available on Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, of course, and on YouTube here. Click subscribe and download to help us keep getting this show to you and find our coverage at WV Sports Now. So I kind of already knew your stance, and my stance is clearly out there now. So as we now fully get into kind of what Gibson said and the debate of this, why do you feel that West Virginia should play Marshall in football, and how often do you think they should play? Because that's also another part of this. There's not much room to do this as often as some maybe would have wanted a decade ago. Do you think this has to be an annual game, no matter how hard it is to put that on the schedule? How often would you be okay with, and why do you want to see this game?
Yeah. So I think that was the biggest problem with the series from a decade ago when they did it. Was it like a 7-year annual thing? And I think obviously in hindsight, I think that was terrible for it, because it wore out its welcome immediately, especially because, I have the results pulled up. The first few games weren't competitive.
Right. There was a couple competitive ones out of the last 10. More recently from what it was 100 years ago before the long break. Yeah.
So, when you go 7 straight years, it just wore out its welcome probably. And so I feel like if you're going to schedule this, I think it would be much better as one of these contracts they sign where it's not, hey, we're going to play, if we're going to play 3 years in a row, it's, hey, we're going to play this year, we'll play 2 years from now, and we'll play 2 years after that.
Yeah, so from 2006, they played every year until 12. So 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The 2010 game was the one where Gino was there, and that was obviously a great tenure for the Mountaineer program. Geno Smith, Tavon Austin, and company. That was the game that West Virginia won in Huntington, but in overtime, and was trailing in the fourth quarter. Obviously, Marshall's never won this game, but that was the one they really should have won, and that would have been the game they would have been celebrating for the next century. They did not win it, though, and that was a really good Mountaineer era, arguably a better one to win then than if they would say hypothetically win this season. But they did have that streak, and obviously before that, you had the 97 game with Randy Moss where he had the touchdowns, but they didn't win. It was kind of competitive, but West Virginia ended up winning despite Marshall at that point becoming FBS off of the great FCS era they had, and then before that it was 100 years.
And I just think, it's one of these things. I've I got into this a lot when we talked about spring games, but it's one of these things that is good about college football and is different from the pros and makes it special, where Probably WVU fans aren't going to think like this, but if you're just a fan of college football, like these games are fun, right? Like the North Carolina big schools sometimes go out and play App State, and Virginia goes and plays JMU, and stuff like
Ohio
that.
State's played freaking Ohio. I mean,
Yeah, and it's like I'm reminded, and Mike, you'll know about this, when the quote unquote big brother is the one that says no, 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 no.
yeah, right.
It reminds me of Pitt basketball taking away the city game with Duquesne.
Sure, it is similar, yeah.
Where that was like, I mean, that was even a game people liked. Like, I don't think,
and that's a better comparison, because a lot of people in Pittsburgh bring up the comparison of Pitt Penn State. In football, I don't think that's a fair comparison, because they're both Power 4 programs, even though Penn State doesn't want to play them and they kind of feel like they're the older brother. But Pitt Duquesne in basketball is a power versus a mid-major, and that is a much more similar comparison, I do feel. Yeah,
and it's I don't think people liked, especially at the end, the Friends of Cole Bowl series, right? But people liked the city game.
I mean, there were some years that Duquesne was so god awful that I don't know if no one went to the attendance didn't say people liked it. I think Pitt fans liked it because they were good, but that is a problem, that when you have a quote unquote rivalry with a mid-major group of 5, it's not as often they can sustain being successful for a long period of time. So even if they have a better year or two, which you could even argue has happened recently in this conversation, will they do that for a decade in a row like a power could, which does ruin, if you have a 7-8 year contract, they're not going to be good all of those years. That I think maybe is kind of what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, I'm a bigger proponent of playing this game for men's basketball.
It's easier to get it on the schedule.
Yeah. And you went over the history. It's Huggins and D'Antoni didn't like each other, and basically both said, we're not going to play it. But that's a game like I feel like every year I get in arguments with people on Twitter about it, where people, the argument on basketball and the football side, I'll stay with basketball for just a second, but they always say, well, West Virginia gets nothing out of the game. And my argument is always, well, like this year they played North Carolina Central. What did they get out of that game? Right? Like they played, teams ranked in the 300s in KenPom. What,
sure.
Why is swapping one of those out for Marshall, worthless? In football, it's tougher because you get 12 games, right? And that's what I'm saying.
You get 3 out of conference in the Big 12. ACC teams get 4. You get 3 out of conference.
So Pitt annually, yes. I don't think anybody disagrees. Pitt should be played annually. Marshall, no. If you play Marshall 2 times a decade, is that something to complain about? Like, I think that would keep intrigue. I think that would keep the novelty of it. And here's, I'm going to say, the W fans don't want to hear this. Marshall winning would be good as a college football fan, because it's interesting. And then, hey, if Marshall were to beat WVU and then they don't play for 2 years,
it would depend on when. Like if you play 2 years, they win the first game, you can play the next year. If they win the last game, then you don't play for 10 years. I mean, that would be a little different, because with the brawl, you're taking a 3-year break, but then they're going to have a 4-year series again.
But it would just, it's just interest, right? It's interest, it's storyline, it's drama, it's theater, it's all the things we love about college football, but that's the kind of thing you want to see from far away. But when it's your team, oh God, no, I don't want to lose to Marshall.
Yeah,
right. Like that's it's a little bit weird when it's your team that you cheer for that is in that scenario.
Yeah, Cody, Nespor, Mike, Asti here in Mountaineer Report, and we are debating West Virginia Marshall and if they should play in football. You did bring up men's basketball as well, because they're playing in baseball. That is the one where they're playing every single year. And Marshall did actually win last year, and it ended up being a blip on the radar. And West Virginia's obviously a better program, and they just recently played this season in baseball. The soccer matchup is arguably, and maybe not even arguably, one of the best in the entire country. And that is a rivalry in soccer, 100%, more than just playing every year. It is a rivalry there. I don't remember if you were at this TBT, but there even seemed to be intensity and kind of a rivalry when the alumni played, and they weren't even all really alumni, because obviously there are people just thrown on those teams from other schools. But in the TBT, other sports, they do play. Men's basketball and football are the sports that certainly WVU fans at a power school really care about. They're the two that are down right now, kind of, and going through transitions, and they are not playing. And what I do want to provide here, not only a devil's advocate stance, I already have a commentary up. It is basically the counter stance. I don't think they should play in football. I actually will move in this direction, though, Cody, which I didn't say this in the article because it was a football conversation. I don't necessarily have a problem with them playing in men's basketball. You have a lot more room on the schedule. It's a lot easier to tinker with that schedule. You do have a lot of room, certainly before conference play, because the way that works, everyone knows, the first year of a 2-year calendar, so 2024 and a 2025 season, 2025, 2020, 2024, 2025 season, that 2024 portion is all out of conference play. That first year of the calendar of the season is out of conference play. So you have tournaments that you have to fit in there now in this day and age to get rankings and be solid on KenPom, but there's plenty of room otherwise to play that in men's basketball. And really the two coaches, the prominent coaches in Huggins and D'Antoni hating each other is why that isn't played. That's not as much an issue the government needs to get involved. That's not as much of a debate. That they were playing. I mean, Huggins kind of stopped that game because he doesn't like D'Antoni, and then D'Antoni was a dick back to him, and they just didn't play. And we didn't actually ask Ross Hodge about that at his intro presser. We've only talked to him once, so maybe he would be down with it. That's a different story. I think there's room on the schedule to do it. I also think that mid-majors garner more respect in college basketball. So the conversation on what would you get out of winning, I do think that because Marshall, they're not a tournament team. They have the one in the last decade. They're not really a tournament team, but every now and then, even if they could flirt with an NIT, even without getting in the tournament, you would maybe get a little more out of that win from a KenPom standpoint than beating a KenPom 300 team, especially if you do it in a neutral location, especially if you factor in maybe it being on the road or rivalry, because some of that is, Vegas odds and who thinks who's going to win and what you're supposed to do against the spread. And then obviously you get to KenPom and the analytics, and that's different. You might get something more out of that in terms of recognition. And I also think there's so many games in those seasons that if Marshall, I'm sure if they played all, even you could even do that every year. And if they did play every year, I'm sure Marshall would at least win it, 3 out of 10. And if that's the case, I don't think it would garner as much of a problem and the parade that I think it would on football. But that's part of what segues into my problem with playing it in football, Cody. It is an unfair dynamic. That is the crux of my issue, is an unfair dynamic. As much as Marshall would get way more out of it winning in most other sports, certainly in men's basketball, the sports they do play in, the baseballs, even though they're not as good, soccer is where they could argue being a better program in recent years. In other sports, both programs would get something out of it because they're on more equal footing. Maybe baseball they're not, but otherwise they're on more equal footing. In men's basketball, obviously the history is on the Mountaineer side, but it's a different dynamic. There's room on the schedule. In football, I understand. I think part of this for the Marshall fan, they bring up, in recent years we've been better. You could debate that all day. Their schedule's easier, but they do have the big win over Notre Dame. West Virginia has been down for the last 6 years under Neil Brown. It's the only 6-year stretch since before Don Allen they didn't at least have one week ranked in the AP poll. But it is the 15th winningest program in the sport's history. It is a program that has a lot of history associated with it. Marshall has only been an FBS program since 97. They were great as an FCS, but as an FBS, the recent tenure has not been that great. And even when they have a great year and win a conference title, then they have coaching drama and they don't even get that part right. Marshall's not like this perennial powerhouse group of 5 by any means. West Virginia will get absolutely nothing out of winning this game. And if Marshall won the game one time in a decade or one time ever, because most of the time in sports, if you see, this team wins, and then you see an overall series of 13-1, every other, match is a blowout, it wouldn't be that bragged about. Marshall would put it on the wall. They'd have a parade. Gibson would be a hero. They might induct him into their Hall of Fame, whether he wins or loses the rest of the schedule. That one win could be their literal Super Bowl, and the rest of their season really wouldn't matter. They could celebrate that win, and that would be it. Whereas West Virginia beats Marshall and then has a good or bad season. It doesn't matter. anyone on West Virginia who beats Marshall and then brags about it beyond that game, everyone would say, what are you doing? You're the power school. Whereas Marshall would brag about that to no end. And I don't see room on the schedule to acquiesce. There are only 3 out of conference games that are available for you when you're a Big 12 team. Again, some other conferences like the ACC, they allow 4. You get 3. Ren Baker's made it very clear, and I think he's right in this, and I think West Virginia's got it wrong the last decade. I've been very loud in this, that you got to play 1 Power 4 to make it respectable, likely that being a rival. They want to play Pitt all the time, but there's going to be a 3-year break. If they have these breaks, play Virginia Tech. That would be the second option for me, and that's a matchup that usually, whether it's Pitt or Virginia Tech, it's usually a similar program. Every now and then they're better than you. Every now and then you're better than them, and you can win some games. They can win some games. Even the Neil Brown era, West Virginia got to win. Like, that's just the way that rivalry usually works. And you'll get some credit for it because it's a power program. You got to play the FCS game, because I already had people say, well, just put them in there instead of RMU, St. Francis, who's going to drop off because they're not even FCS in the future. No, that's a non-starter for me. Power 4 programs around the country, 99% of them play FCS games. Alabama, Georgia, they all do it. Yes, it's a guarantee win. I get the fans don't like the game. I get they don't want to go. Ren Baker, whenever he's broached about, and you've seen this, whenever anyone brings up getting rid of the FCS game, he almost comes across like a jerk, because he literally responds like, I know everyone wants us to play top 5 teams. That's just not smart or logical scheduling. Everyone plays an FCS. We are too. Like, that's just the point of it. If everyone's doing it, you're going to do it. They need to have a similar schedule to what everyone else is doing around the country, not what they were when they were playing 2 Power 4s, the 1 FCS they did get in, and then not even a group of 5. And then you add in the group of 5 game. And we've seen that plan work. Even TCU on a 4-team playoff without a conference title, they had a really weak out of conference schedule. They had only 1 Power 4 that was Colorado before Dion, but it was a Power 4, and it was a group of 5 and an FCS, and they got in. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to do more of that, more than that. And if you want to maybe have Marshall be that group of 5 team once in a decade, maybe okay, I can see it. But the crux of the issue is there's not much room on the schedule. The dynamic is very unfair. You wouldn't gain anything out of it. It's more important on what you gain out of the games in football than the other sports. And they are not willing to acquiesce, to me, to anything within reason. They want treated financially or how this would be scheduled like an equal. Cody, it doesn't matter whether they have this Notre Dame win or West Virginia's been down. That's almost insulting if I was getting that phone call from Ren Baker. West Virginia's a power program. They're not. You can't call someone and say, let's do a home and home and start with us and let's do equal and split the money. That comes off insulting. And I get they're going to Ohio this year, and I don't even like that. I've voiced that too. But at least it does give them a road out of conference game, because otherwise the schedule would be all home out of conference games this year. And then it's going to be a 2-for-1 and it'll flip around. But Marshall's not being reasonable. They want this to be a home and home. They want the game in Huntington at one point. They want the money in their direction. And this also comes across to me, Cody, a little bit self-serving. And as much as I'm against playing this, I do get why Gibson's doing this. I do think this would ingratiate him to the fans. I do think winning this would arguably be more important than whether he wins 7 games in year 1 at Marshall, if he would somehow force this on the schedule in the future. And I do get that they have nothing to lose. Like, if they play the game and lose by 100, everyone would say, well, that's how it's supposed to be. If they win and then lose the other matchups, but win one of them in a decade, he would be a hero. They would be a hero. Even if he's fired in 2 years, he would be a hero and remembered forever. That's his mindset. It also would help them in attendance, because they struggle with attendance. So my issue is kind of a 3-prong attack while I'm against this. There's not tons of room on the schedule to do this as often as they want. It's insulting the way they want to do this because of the history of the program, and that one's a group of 5 and one's a power. And it's a self-serving, unfair dynamic. I just don't think it's West Virginia WVU's problem to help them in any way.
Yeah, so it certainly needs to be, scheduling-wise, it needs to be a 2-for-1, right? 2 in Morgantown, 1 in Huntington.
But that's not what's broached by them. They have never agreed to that.
Well, in the since they last played, that's, I think, been the sticking point.
Right.
That's been out in the public is, Marshall wants home and home.
WVU's even talked about that publicly. Like, that is what they get. They get told they want to do the home and home.
Yeah. And so, when you talk about like the point where like West Virginia gets nothing out of it, I don't know, because I think like David did beat Goliath, right? And I think it's funny to imagine Goliath being like, "No, we're not gonna fight. I don't get anything out of beating you. We're not gonna fight." Right?
We're still hearing about David beating Goliath, though. Centuries later, we're still hearing about it.
So like, it's. I don't know if this game will ever be played again. I would like to see it. I know logistically it's tough. I know, sort of sentimentally, it's going to be a lot for people to get over. But I have, and hopefully you can agree with me on this, Mike. I don't have a problem with Tony Gibson if he wants to be the guy to take up the mantle to push for this.
I get it in his perspective. I get why he's doing it. It's annoying to me.
Because one of my favorite coaches to watch from afar, because he's very entertaining, Pat Narduzzi.
He's entertaining as well, yes.
What does he do every preseason? Every ACC Media Day, he'll take a shot at Penn State.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And I like that. Right?
And he knows they're not going to play, and he knows why, and he knows the result. Right, yeah. He does.
So,
anyway.
like, he does that once or twice a year. I think it's fun as somebody watching from afar. If Gibson wants to do that, and like, right, because we're in the off season, if he just wants to once a year talk to the Charleston Gazette-Mail and say, yeah, they won't play us, or that, like, I think that's decent theater for college football. I think that's decent. Like, and so, like I said, I don't know if this game will ever get played again for a lot of reasons. I hope one day it would be, but I don't have an issue with Tony Gibson being the guy to take up the mantle and push for it, because, like we said, nobody has been pushing for this. Football or men's basketball, and we see it.
But you are on the 2-for-1 side. So, my counter to you would be, because we talked off the air and how somebody needs to ask Gibson whether you would do a 2-for-1 instead of the home and home, and no one's asked him that yet. But my counter to you is, if someone would ask him and he pushes back and says, no, we got to be fair to the state and do home and home, would you then move off and be like, Gibby, I can't play the game then? Because that's where they've been. It's not a crazy thought. That is where they've been as an institution. Ren Baker's even kind of alluded to this at his intro presser. Like, that's what I've heard brought to me. They want to do this, and we have to, he tried to dance around it. But I feel like the first part of this, we're debating it now because it's the off season, it's a show. Yeah. He's a head coach. He brought it up. But there is the reality of this, that this debate is almost pointless outside of the fun of the show unless they budge off the home and home requirement. There is no word on them budging off of it to this point as we're talking.
Yeah, so that's what sort of the next step journalistically in this story needs to be, is somebody needs to ask Tony Gibson.
Needs to freaking ask this, yes.
Are you willing to do a 2-for-1? And if he says yes or no, then somebody on our side needs to ask Ren Baker, hey, Tony Gibson says they're willing to do a 2-for-1. Is that something West Virginia would ever consider? Right. And like, that's because
then you have the comparison with Ohio. You just did it with Ohio. They're on the schedule. That's more of an even comparison.
So before we get into actually sort of seriously talking about it, those are the questions that need to be answered. Is Marshall willing? Right, and that's negotiation, that's compromise, right?
But how far would you go to it? Like, if you're on WVU's side and Ren Baker gets on the phone, maybe calls Marshall's AD and is like, look, Gibson's not going to let this die. Rich actually is friends with him. He wants me to call. Let's try this one more freaking time. He's now a coach. He wasn't there before. Would you do a 2-for-1? We'll try to make it happen in 10 years. My question to you then would be, if they come back at you and say, no, it's home and home or nothing, would you try to fight them, or would you say, guys, that's it? Like, we're not playing it. Would you try to counter and be like, please play it because it's the state, or would you just let it? Because that's a serious question, because there's been a lot of reporting in the last decade that West Virginia would have been willing at different points, but then they counter with, we got to do the home and home.
Yeah, no, well,
and then it ends dead.
Obviously, West Virginia's in the seat for any negotiations on this. So if they, I think we all agree reasonably want a 2-for-1, that can be the non-starter in these negotiations, which has been. And so, no, I mean, that's what I was saying. Like, obviously, if Marshall really wants this to happen and really wants to get traction on this,
Right.
And maybe Marshall doesn't, right? Maybe it's just Tony Gibson getting a headline, and
It
that's all he
could
wants.
it could be. I think some fans kind of even like this dynamic.
But
if we don't play, we can't lose, and then we can just say you don't want to play us, right?
Yeah. But if this is serious, if this is actually like Marshall would have to make that compromise and be willing to do 2-for-1,
right?
Or let's say, hell, let's just say, hey, we're going to do a one-off just to see if anybody cares about this, and we'll play it in Morgantown, right? Like that
in Morgantown though for the one-off.
That's Morgantown. Like those are the steps of this negotiation that's going to have to happen, because we know West Virginia isn't going to budge. They haven't budged for 10 years. They don't want the home and home. And so if this is serious, if this is real, those are the things Marshall's going to have to do. Otherwise, if Tony Gibson just wants to get a headline once a year, that's all this is, and it's smoke and mirrors, and who cares?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I guess to Gibson too, at least on his recent comments by the Charleston Gazette-Mail, he was asked. Prior to that, he was bringing it up on his own. So far, he has 2 headlines since being the head coach, and his only 2 headlines that have gone anywhere beyond Huntington have been about playing West Virginia. And again, Cody, on multiple fronts here, I don't think they should play. However, I agree it's smart by Gibson to keep bringing this up. Mm-hmm. I do think there's no downside for him to not only bring it up, but also even if they would somehow end up being pigeonholed and having to play if they secretly don't really want to, it's no big deal if they would play and get blown out. They can come back and say we're the Group of 5 school, and they hadn't won it before. I think all of this is an advantage for him to bring this up, and I also do think this counts as a smokescreen from the fact that he is dealing with a pretty difficult situation to try to overhaul a team despite having won last year and to get a fan base excited again. Many people down there are kind of upset that they finally got something going with Huff, and then that got destroyed. They had a lot of portal work that was going in and out throughout the last several months, and there's a lot of misreporting nationally on what's going on with West Virginia. No one's talking Marshall nationally, but every now and then you'll see, whether it be Barstool or Bleacher Report or mostly a digital platform, or anyone will throw up a little article like Gibson says this about WVU. Should they play them? Should they not? They'll actually feed into this sometimes nationally. Otherwise, they're not talking Marshall at all. So all of that makes sense for Gibson to get in there. There's really no negative. However, I would be very surprised that Marshall would ever cave off the home and home, because they've been sticking to their guns for a long damn time. And part of it is also because, West Virginia is going to play Ohio on the road, and then, of course, that'll be a 2-for-1. And if you're going to play Ohio, why not West Virginia? I know their stadium's smaller, which Gibson did bring up. And that's the sound argument that Gibson does have outside of the counter argument against him that I'm giving, that it doesn't really benefit the Mountaineers. But the other end of this is I also feel like there's a incentive for Gibson and Marshall to want to force this, because they have an issue with attendance. They can't get people to go, even when they're winning. So they know that if West Virginia's down there, they're going to get a sold-out crowd. The difference is, while the Mountaineers have been down for 6 years under Neil Brown, and the attendance is not what it was during the Geno Smith or the Pat White days, or certainly even before when they were good, they still have a minimum bar number that is way better than Marshall. They're going to get a certain amount of people there no matter what. They don't need Marshall to do this. They don't need Marshall like Marshall needs them. So that is what I get annoyed by this. As much as I get Marshall's stance, there's only one program benefiting from this in all reality. West Virginia does not gain that much from playing this as an actual school, which should be their top priority. So, Cody, if you are the people who are the only people benefiting, who need the other program more than they need you, then for you to be the stubborn one seems counterproductive. And that's what's been going on the last 10 years.
Yeah. So that's where this scenario, the perfect comparison is Pitt-Penn State, where I know Mike, what's the most attended sporting event in the history of Heinz Field, at least at the time it was at the time, Pitt-Penn State, right?
Yeah, I mean, then the backyard brawl actually broke that. Right.
But Pitt-Penn State destroyed it wasn't even just Heinz Field, it was the Pittsburgh attendance record, destroyed it that first year they played, which Pitt won, which was very fun. But, I mean, Pitt, very well documented attendance problems playing at Heinz Field. Like, cannot get people into there. But hey, when they had Penn State those 2 times, it's sold out.
Well,
And,
I mean,
and
even
it's
when West Virginia goes or when they have Notre Dame there,
right.
I mean,
So
their top sellouts, their top attendance games are always out of conference games when a big program, a quote unquote rival, comes
yeah.
to
So,
them. Yeah, 100%.
so this is where the comparison is perfect. Where if Marshall has attendance problems, that if they ever got West Virginia to come down to Huntington, that would probably, I assume, break all the records, right?
I would imagine.
So that's where it's a perfect comparison. And like you said, I agree with you. I don't think Penn State will ever play Pitt again. I don't think Penn State will ever play West Virginia again, quite frankly.
No, I actually talked about this with Smeltzer, who covers Penn State for our Nittany Sports Now site. I don't think that anything's ever going to happen again, and not even just from the Penn State side. I don't think West Virginia cares about playing it. Ren Baker has been very honest. He wants one Power Four. He wants to be a rival. I don't think there's much of a rivalry between the two schools, and I don't think he's going to put Penn State on there unless it's the only Power Four of that year. And if you look at Penn State's out-of-conference schedule, they kind of want even lesser than West Virginia on that out-of-conference schedule. Like, they don't want much there because they know they got to go to a brutal Big Ten, and they're an elite program, but they're rarely ever going to win that conference. So I don't think it ever fits to play again, and that's why they didn't play for so long, but I also don't think it ever fits right now. It just never fits. Unfortunately, during some great years for the Mountaineers, they didn't get to play Penn State, and obviously they haven't won that much in that history of that, I guess, series or rivalry, whatever you want to call it, depending on your age. But I don't think they ever play again. I do think the Pitt game, regardless of who's in charge, will be a consistent thing, even if there's a couple-year breaks, and they're always going to get that on the schedule. I do think they can play Virginia Tech again. I've debated this with a friend of mine who covers Maryland. I don't think West Virginia Maryland's that much of a rivalry, honestly. There's no big moment from that. I think it's more of a regional thing. However, I think there's a better chance they could play that again than West Virginia ever playing Penn State. And Marshall could maybe be in the mix. I think not more than for 2-for-1 in a decade, or maybe just a one-off in Morgantown. I also don't think they would do the one-off, Cody, because even if you come down to the one-off, it can't only one time be in Huntington, and they want the money from the game in their house. That's what they want. So they wouldn't agree. I don't think they would agree to a one-off and never play again. I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's, and it's Marshall is allowed to want to profit from something like this, right?
Sure.
And that's, but right.
You can split money with them even if it's not there, but yeah.
Yeah. And that's, they could, again, this is something else that everybody argues about is how they split gate, and it's, but that's all stuff. But yeah, I think, I think there's I don't know, halfway decent chance the Big 12 could move to 4 out of conference games. It seems like a lot of the Power 4 conferences want less. They want their teams to stack up a bunch of wins and not cannibalize each other in conference play.
Yeah.
So I think we could move to 4 out of conference, and that
3 that makes Marshall easier if you do that.
And it's I am not saddened. I'm bummed out that I wrote a story about this at my last job. If they stay at 3 and they play Pitt every year, it's easy to project that they would never play Virginia Tech ever again, right? And I think that sucks.
If they play every year, yeah, right.
I think that sucks. And then it's so I would fully support a move to 4 out of conference, because then it's you could play Virginia Tech, you could play Syracuse, you could play Maryland, right?
Some of these games College, right?
Boston College. Some of these games that people would like to see, but
Miami,
logistically, you can't get on the schedule with 3 out of conference. So I think
there's always going to be a break, though. I don't think it'll be literally Pitt every year, because even now, I think there's going to be enough of a break they could throw another one in there. But I just don't see how you do it with this current format.
Yeah, so that's why it's so tough right now, even to just fit a Marshall onto the schedule. It's so tough when you only got 3 out of conference, and I think I could reasonably see the Big 12 moving to 4. I could see all the Power 4 conferences moving to 4 out of conference games. Honestly, it just feels like. It just feels like that's what they want.
Well, not only does it feel like that's what they want and that's what they should do, Cody, but this is a bigger annoyance of mine. You have a bunch of teams in different conferences with different rules going for one title. It would be like if they had a different schedule structure for the American League East teams versus the National League Central teams, but yet they're both trying to be in the World Series at the end of the day in different leagues. Like, that's just a crazy scenario. You have one conference allowing 4 out of conference games, the other one doing 3. That's how you have a strength of schedule issue. No, it should, at the very least, it should be all 3 out of conference games or all 4 out of conference games across the Power 4. Clearly, we all agree who are the Power 4 conferences as we're speaking. And of course, that may change. You may go to 2 super conferences. All of that in the next decade is very likely. But as we're speaking now with 4, these 4 should either be at 3 or 4 and out of conference to make it at least similar to what you're trying to map out of conference wise. But it's not right now. It's not right now. Some can go 4, some can go 3. I would obviously prefer the 4 model. And the reason why I've been so strict on the 3 model with 1 Power 4 is because that's keeping up with what everyone else mostly was doing. The WVU was not in that schedule model. But if you move to 4 out of conference, then yes, you can play Pitt and Virginia Tech in the same year, and then you can play the one group of 5 and 1 FCS. You don't need 2 FCSs in a 4-team model for sure, in a 4 out of conference game model. But I don't know if I'm as optimistic as that's going to happen anytime soon, to be honest. I mean, the Big 12 never did the divisions things that other conferences did for many years. Bringing up Pitt again, there was one year where they were in the ACC title game, despite the fact they were the 3rd best team in the conference because they won a division that was down. West Virginia has to be either a 1 or a 2 every year they've ever been in the Big 12. They've never gone to a division format. I hate the division format, but the annoyance is one conference doing it and the other not doing it. So getting it all uniformed amongst the Power 4 is what should happen for sure. And ideally, that would be no divisions, 1 versus 2, and you have 4 out of conference games. That would be the ideal scenario, and that would allow a little bit more room. But as I said, there's room to do it on a men's basketball schedule. There's 100% room to do it there. It is very hard to do it on the football schedule. I think Marshall fans underrate how hard it is to do it on the football schedule because they're not a Power 4 who's dealing with this issue from a major conference, and they're just taking anybody who can come, basically. It's very difficult to do this schedule this way, and until they're not as stubborn, this is mostly a non-starter for me. And I do also think, Cody, and we actually are both from Pennsylvania, despite having WVU degrees and covering the Mountaineers, I think a lot of this is whether you're an in-state fan or an out-of-state fan. I think a lot of out-of-state fans, just, friends who are alums when I was in school, people I see on social media, people that are from Pittsburgh, people that are from Virginia, people that are from Maryland, people that are from New Jersey, Florida. There's a large contingent of these people from these locations every year at WVU as just students alone. They don't see Marshall as a rivalry in football, maybe in other sports, but I don't think they would care about it that much more than going to see Ohio or going to see another group of 5. They don't look at Marshall as anything more than what they are, and beating them would mean nothing to them. People from West Virginia, of course, they may care about it more, even if they think they have a better program at WVU, certainly historically, and maybe they wouldn't gain much on a national level. People from West Virginia, certainly from Charleston, from Huntington, they would care because they would brag to their friend. They went to high school. Some of the class went to WVU. Some went to Marshall. It would mean more to that contingent. And that's a large contingent, of course, if not more than half of the student body. But what I think people also don't get, Morgantown is on the border. It's an hour away from Pittsburgh. It's 10 minutes away from Pennsylvania, really. If you're driving on 79, it'd be 20 minutes to be nice. The sign pops you before you even could, be coherent enough when you're driving 79 north that I do all the time. If West Virginia University, Cody, was put in Charleston a century plus ago, I think a lot of this conversation would be different. The whole situation with Marshall might be different. I don't think a lot of people from Pittsburgh would be there as much as they are. I think they would have less Pittsburgh people that are alums. I don't think they'd have to worry about being part of Pittsburgh media or whatever media and whether they want to do that or not. None of that would be an issue. They would be a West Virginia school and that'd be it. And they could worry about West Virginia. It's in Morgantown. It's a border city. They're in the DMA of Pittsburgh media market. That's just a fact. I mean, this could be a much even deeper conversation because I know there are a lot of West Virginia people in the state that even hate that people that work for WVU, people that are coaches at WVU, people that are fans, media members at WVU also talk about Pittsburgh pro teams or cover Pittsburgh pro teams, or Neil Brown had a connection with Pittsburgh pro teams, and so did Bill Stewart, and people that work for WVU wear Steeler gears around the W facility, Steeler gear around there. I know there are West Virginia people that hate that, but it's because it's on the border. I mean, that's in their media market. That's the pro team that's closest to them. Then if they were a Bengals fan, they'd have to drive 4 hours versus only 45 minutes or an hour and a half. That's the dynamic of being in Morgantown. It's hard to do this charity service for the state of West Virginia when you're a border state, half the alums do not care, and you wouldn't gain anything from the game. That, I think, is also an end of this, too, that Ren Baker, who's an outside AD, I think he's going to sit there and say, what do we gain as WVU? The answer cannot be what the state gains. I work for WVU. At least that's how he should be thinking.
Yeah, I think a hurdle in this is the fact that, like, when I'm not in Morgantown, like when I come home to Pennsylvania, not even in terms of WVU, like nobody talks about Marshall, right? Marshall's not a national brand. And so when you're in state, like in Morgantown, I know Marshall alums. I know people who care about Marshall. I know WVU fans who do view Marshall as a rival, and they like to beat Marshall, and they like to see Marshall lose. And that. But you're right. When you get out of the state, nobody really cares. And like, you know, the closer you get down to Huntington and Charleston,
it's different.
It gets different. And
100%. I mean, somebody here in our chat even said, if you're not south of I-64, you're not a real West Virginian. I mean, there's a whole funny part of that is there are people that are in the southern end of West Virginia that do think people that are just from Morgantown, Wheeling, Weirton, that connect to Pittsburgh, for example, are not true West Virginians because they're in the north section, they're on a border, and they root for the Steelers. Like that continues. I mean, this is a funny thing in a way, but there are a lot of people in Southwest Virginia that hate the fact that there are people from West Virginia that root for Pittsburgh pro teams because they're so close. But and then people in Morgantown, not even or from Pittsburgh or from Washington, PA, or any of that close within 2 hours of each other, a lot of the time they don't even understand why that's an issue, because this debate also doesn't happen as much in the similar other border places, but there's a lot of people in southern West Virginia that are so attached to their spot, and that's a whole other annoyance that I think. I don't think people from certain parts of the region that are West Virginia fans care about Marshall. I don't think, like, I know somebody who is a diehard West Virginia fan from a Pittsburgh suburb, went to WVU. He's actually in Pittsburgh media. I'll call him out now in West Euler. He is WVU. Every time you see him, he has WVU gear. He does not care about Marshall at all. At all. Like, that's just the reality. And are you going to tell him he's not a WVU fan because he didn't grow up in southern West Virginia? Like, that is the weirdness of this debate that I do think it makes it an issue. Every WVU fan, I guess where I'm going, every WVU fan, no matter where you're from, Cody, hates Pitt. Every WVU fan, no matter where you're from, knows the Virginia Tech rivalry and respects it. I don't know if it connects to everybody with Maryland, but there's probably more of them. But with Pitt, 100%, Pittsburgh, people from a Pittsburgh suburb that go to the WVU, they hate Pitt. It is a unanimous thing. That is not the case with Marshall. If you are not from West Virginia, it's just not on your radar at all. And that's part of this. How can you force a game that half your fan base doesn't care about?
Yeah, and I think I think I had lost what I was thinking. Oh, I remember. We're never going to talk about this again, so I want to bring it up right now.
Okay.
The section of the fan base that is like, you can't be a WVU fan and root for the Steelers.
Oh man, I see it all the time. I see it all the time. I see it so often, it's outrageous.
What does that mean? Like, come on. Like I said, we're never going to talk about this again. But that's
yeah, I was trying to bring it up without making it as part of the show, but like, that is. I hear that all the time, like, Cody. I hear that all the time. You got to compartmentalize
a little. Like, if people want to say, "Oh, if you're a WVU fan, you shouldn't root for Kenny Pickett," like, maybe. Like, I could see that.
No, there are.
You can't root for the Steelers at all.
Yeah, no, there are 100. I hear it all the time. There are West Virginia people, and they're almost all from West Virginia. None of them out on the outside care about this. But West Virginia natives who are WVU fans often think that by hating Pitt, the school, you need to hate the entire city, which encompasses the pro teams. Understanding that there are no pro teams in those leagues in West Virginia. So the real hypocrisy is sometimes people saying that are fans of, say, the Cincinnati Bengals when there's a Cincinnati school in your conference right now. But again, no, that goes on very frequently. That is a gigantic thing. And the funny thing is that is something that is not even understood nationally, but 100%. I hear it all the time. I mean, I'm from Pittsburgh. I'm in Pittsburgh. I cover West Virginia. I hear it all the time. It is a common thing. I even get like, Pittsburgh guy talking about like, I'm a WVU alum as covering this, but I hear this all the time. And the real thing that no one ever has an answer for. Do you realize, not you personally, Cody, but anyone who has that opinion, people that live in Oklahoma, for the most part, are Dallas Cowboy fans? How often does a Texas fan tell an Oklahoma fan, you're banned from rooting for the Cowboys? Like, Oklahoma fans would say, I don't think I care whether you approve of this or not. This is the team I'm rooting for. When you're in the Pacific Northwest, the Oregon Duck fans often root for the Seattle Seahawks, but so do the Washington fans. Like that, just there's only so many pro teams. there's hundreds more of college teams. You cannot just go to the team in your city because there's no Morgantown professional team outside of the Black Bears and those teams. There's no NFL team in Morgantown. If there were, maybe we would have a debate. But that 100% exists too. But the point of even bringing that up is I don't think there's enough of the fan base overall that cares about playing Marshall as much as people from West Virginia do.
Yeah, no, yeah. And that's why, I mean, we haven't heard about this for 10 years, right? I mean, every once in a while, somebody brings it up, but that's why there hasn't been a real push. And that's what I keep saying. Like, I'm fine with Tony Gibson if he wants to do this. Like, I don't think it's, unless he makes this like a big freaking thing and is talking about it constantly and it just gets belligerent about it. Like, I don't think it's bad to have I'm not exactly old enough to remember, but I think Joe Manchin was kind of the driving force of the original series. And it's like, just nobody's done that. And if Tony Gibson wants to kind of do that, it's like, I don't think that's worse. Even if it never happens, right? Like I keep bringing up Narduzzi. I don't think Pitt and Penn State are ever going to play again. But I also don't think it's wrong for Narduzzi to bring it up once a year. I don't think it would be terrible for Tony Gibson to bring it up once a year, right? To end his preseason media, even if he wants to take a little shot at West Virginia, right? Like, I don't think that's terrible. Like, I don't know. That's college football, man. That's fun. That's theater.
And honestly, his comments, he was trying not to take a shot because I do think as much as he's coaching Marshall, he has the WVU connection. He even said when he was talking about, we got to go play Georgia. If we're going to play one Power Four, why not the other? Everybody knows Georgia's obviously a better program than WVU, but he even said, I don't want to make this about comparing the histories of those programs. If we're going to play one Power Four, why not be WVU? He was literally trying to not take a shot. It almost seemed like he was going out of his way to not take a shot when I don't think anyone would be mad about saying Georgia's better than WVU right now. But that was what he was trying to do to respect the situation. Yeah, I get him bringing it up. I get why he would bring it up. I just have yet to have anyone really give me a benefit to this for WVU other than the David versus Goliath, like you got to play David. Like there's not really a benefit is the issue. So I guess my summary of this is, if you're going to play Ohio, I could see maybe doing a 2-for-1 at some point with Marshall, but there's no benefit of playing it. So I certainly wouldn't force it. I wouldn't require it. I am a border school in a state. I'm not in the center of that state. I have fans from all over the place. A lot of them are not going to care about this, even if my in-state fans would. And I'm only going to, try so hard. And if it's a home and home, I wouldn't even continue the conversation. 2-for-1 or nothing, maybe a one-off, but it has to be in Morgantown. And if all of that does not work for Marshall, then either they're not serious about pushing this or they're just being unreasonable. So that is 100%, part of this too, that Marshall has not caved off of their stance of wanting to make this Because when you compare Pitt and Penn State, it makes sense for Pitt to say, well, I'm not going to do, a 2-for-1 with you. We're a Power 4 program, even if maybe you're a better one right now. Or if West Virginia and Pitt are getting together on a schedule, they're not going to do a 2-for-1 with Pitt and get screwed on. That's why they're playing 4 games. They got to get 2 in West Virginia and 2 in Pittsburgh. That's why they're doing the 4 games. That West Virginia required that to be fair, even if maybe you start on the road. But that's not the same when you're talking Group of 5 versus Power. Like it's just not the same dynamic. And I think Marshall needs to get that before this conversation can really get serious.
Yeah. And here's my kind of final thought on this. And where I do think I have a disconnect with this issue where as I view this through the lens of a fan, right? Like
right, yeah.
By and large, I don't care who West Virginia plays. Like it's my job to cover them, right? Like I'll write about who's on the schedule. I can analyze it. So like I'm not losing sleep over who they play, right? But so I analyze this through a fan perspective, and through that perspective, I don't care about WVU's pocketbook. Like I just don't, right? Like the benefit, Mikey said you don't see the benefit for me is that it's a fun game, right? It would be fun to watch,
I guess,
right?
Yeah.
Like that, like there's more interest than playing Ohio, right? And so that's. As I try to put myself in fan shoes, that's like I don't care about how they split the gate revenue or who makes like I just don't care about that if I'm a fan. And there is a disconnect, right? There's this I forget what show it was. It was a couple of weeks ago. I would love to give credit. It was one of the national radio shows was talking about like the GMification of fans, and they were specifically talking about the NBA where like people get so hung up in cap space and deferred money.
Fans and it's like, you care about owners' pockets a lot. Yeah. 100%.
And it's like at the end of the day, you should just cheer for your team and want them to win, right? And I kind of view it this way. It's like if you're a fan of West Virginia, you should want them to play interesting games and win interesting games. And you shouldn't get red in the face arguing with people about gate revenue and how they split it with Marshall and how much money West Virginia would or wouldn't make. And it's like, just, that's my view of this is like, it would be a fun game, right? Like I'm not going to argue until I'm blue in the face about it. And I'm not going to boo-hoo about money and all. And that's when I got into it with fans on Twitter during the TBT, that was my part. And that was more about basketball, but I was like, I don't know. It'd be fun. If you can't meet me halfway and just say it would be a fun game to watch, and you're going to get so hung up on money and this, like, we're never going to see eye to eye and we'll just disagree on this. But like, if you can meet me halfway and just say, hey, this would be a fun game. People would be interested in it. It would sell out. It would be fun to watch on TV. Like if you can meet me there, like, okay, we can have a discussion about this and we can get into the logistics. But if like I said, if people want to get so hung up on money and what does this do for their strength of schedule and the RPI, and it's like, I don't know, man, just watch the games on TV. Like root for the Mountaineers, hope they win and watch the games. Like, I don't know. It's not your money. It's you're not Ren Baker, right? Like, I don't know. If you want to care that much, then like that's how you can be a fan. But that's just not how I view sports, and we're just not going to see eye to eye.
Yeah, so I get that thinking, and I mostly agree. But I guess the comment that I can add to it, that I can get a little bit of why the fans care. It would be disrespectful to the West Virginia program to do a home and home and split the gate halfway with Marshall, even though maybe you as a fan shouldn't care about that. That would perception-wise come off like West Virginia's small potatoes. Why are they talking about Big 12 titles? They're splitting a gate with a little group of 5. What the hell are they doing? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it would just the perception of that. I don't think Ren would even want that perception there. I think that perception would you're West Virginia. You feel like you get disrespected all the time nationally, all the time. I mean, to the point that, Cody, I'm sure you've noticed this transition. Ren Baker was an outsider. Through the years, it feels like he is starting to wear, I'm feeling disrespected by this program getting disrespected. He starts press conferences reading history. Like most people do not do that when they're AD of a program. So I think that West Virginia fans are just very guarded in what the perception would look like. And that perception would look negative. It would look like they're not an elite program because even Pitt, who they think they're equal with, would not ever consider splitting a gate with a group of 5. They will go and play them. They've been on the road and even play them, but they do the 2-for-1 thing. They're not going to give half the money to those schools.
Yeah. And
That would just be an embarrassing situation to have. And then the other part of that, when you mentioned strength of schedule, the reality is strength of schedule does matter, though. So as much as maybe a fan gets too bogged down in it, saying what would they get out of it strength of schedule wise does matter. We've seen, that is a thing more so now than ever before in both football and men's basketball. And I really think it should be there. Otherwise you just can, that's my whole issue with UCF trying to claim years ago. They didn't played at 89 strength of schedule or 86 or whatever it was. You can't just roll an easy schedule and say, well, they're fun games because they're close geographically to us. Hell, then West Virginia should just put a schedule together of Marshall, JMU, Pitt, play West Lib, and just roll the schedule and then say, let's go ahead and be in the national title game. That's not going to work. Strength of schedule does matter. And I think there are a lot of fans that really dive into the nitty gritty on what can get their program elevated and what the media looks at, what the national media looks at, what the committees look at. There are fans that study KenPom that don't get paid and are not in media. So I think this contingent of fan in sports, they're really getting into what do I need to know for my program to be good versus kind of what you're saying of just watch the game and have fun. I think that area is kind of a thing of the past because it has become such an analytical age, and strength of schedule does matter and really should in order to even it out, or otherwise you have teams taking advantage of it and throwing up Cupcake City and rolling it and then saying, let's go play, be on equal ground with a team that played 5 ranked teams every, throughout a season. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah. And real quick, it was the Dan Levitard show who did that segment a couple weeks ago. I looked it up. Obviously great, great people.
I love that show. And I could see them arguing that. Yeah. I could.
I don't know. My view, Mike, is if I'm a fan of a team, I don't even want to know, don't even tell me how the gate money is being split. Cause I don't. Who cares about it?
It gets out there, though. So you
I know,
don't want to know, but it gets out there.
Tell me about the quarterback, right? I don't want to sit and get mad about gate split money that has no effect on me, and that's I don't understand. I understand there are people who get on the message boards every day and talk about the team every day, but then I don't understand how you take that so far to getting genuinely upset about stuff like this, where it's Marshall wants to split the gate fare with West Virginia, and that's an outrage. It's I don't. That is so far in my mind away from being a fan of a team. I don't understand how that's. I don't understand how that's fun for people. Right?
I don't think it's fun. I don't think it's fun. But do you not see how it could be a disrespect if you're a West Virginia fan to think a group of 5 would want to split money with you?
Well, like I said, I don't even want to know that. Right?
But we do know.
I know, but I don't care. As a fan,
if we didn't know, I'd love to live in that world. But unfortunately, we do know. I would like not to know. But I don't know. There are casual. I think there are casual fans who just want to enjoy. But as much as sometimes part of the West Virginia fan base does annoy me, I think they got real evil during the Neil Brown era. I think some of them are unreasonable with the whole conversation we had about Pittsburgh pro teams. I think there are some negatives to the fan base. However, I will kind of go with what Kuz just said in the chat, kind of alluding to this. I do think West Virginia has a lot of very passionate, very knowledgeable fans and has more non-casual fans than a lot of programs in the country. Now, of course, there's a lot of great fans around the country, but even just looking at how many YouTubers there are and content creators, things like that, there are a lot of people that are not getting paid a salary to cover, to dig, to research, to try to do this, and yet they're doing it because they love the Mountaineers, and they want to make some cash, but they're looking into the money. They're looking into NIL. I'm getting questions from them all the time on what's real in terms of NIL reporting. They care about that more than the quarterback on the roster. That is a thing. There are a lot of West Virginia fans that just are that's why the fan base gets a lot of respect nationally, at least as a fan base of being a great fan base. They are very active and very passionate and rabid. So I think it's harder to sell them on just don't care about any of the nitty gritty. Just watch the game. Whatever's on the schedule is on the schedule. The QB will be out there whenever the game starts. Don't obsess over things. I don't think they're going to do it. That's just not the fan base.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, don't like that stuff, like the money. I guess I'm hung up on the money. Like, I hate, I hate money stuff in sports, like in
I know, but
professional
with
sports.
college athletics, it's discussed. It's so
But
much a
it's
big
like
deal now, and this fan base
just
obsesses over the money.
I know, and that's probably what gets me. Where it's like stuff like that is so far away from the game being played. It's like that to me. That is not what makes sports fun, right? And so it's I don't like even to a degree talking about the rev share that's going to come through pretty soon. That's like I don't know that
No, it's
I
not
just
fun. I don't have fun
it's
doing it.
yeah.
But I guess I have a
But
question for you
I
then.
understand why people. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, my question would be, do you think, and this is not just a view, but do you think
Yeah,
the way the messaging is handled leads into that a little bit? Because you're sitting there and Ren Baker, sometimes unprompted, is talking about the money, talking about rev share. I feel like a lot of the time he's answering what I'm saying about fans to say we're going to be competing nationally on a financial basis because of rev share. I mean, the most veteran reporter among us, and Bob Hertzel, I believe he asked the rev share question at a recent presser. And that's not something he would have cared about 30 years ago as much when he was covering sports. So, do you think that the messaging of some media and even the program itself is leading fans to care about all that stuff? Because to be fair to the fans, they're getting that fed to them. People are writing
yeah,
articles about just money, and these are not, boneheads. We're talking about legit media members. There are whole articles about money. So they're
yeah.
doing that because there's a market for it. So then
Well, yeah,
it's hard to have the fans not want to consume that.
yeah. Well, that's not on West Virginia's messaging. That's on ever since NIL got implemented,
Well,
right?
no, not just it is collectively. Sure, we're just
Yeah,
around that, and they're just who we're around. But that is nothing against those people. That is a countrywide epidemic, I
yeah,
guess, going on. But I guess because of that, I don't think it's
and
ever gonna. That's why you get
yeah.
the
Well,
press
and
release
that's
that says, "Here's the gate we're sharing. Here's the
yeah,
money." They put that out there because they know people want to know.
yeah, and that's what it's become like. I like the stuff with the Tennessee quarterback wants $4 million, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like
right.
I don't know. I don't know how like I don't know how fans and maybe they're getting to a tipping point. I don't know how fans don't get exhausted having to like constantly worry about that kind of stuff and work. College sports didn't used to be like that, right? In the good old days of 6 years ago or 7 years ago.
Right.
But like that's just the world now, I guess, and it's um
It does suck in a way, but I think that's just the
yeah,
world,
yeah, but
is
it's
what I'm saying.
yeah, but I don't know. I guess I don't know what point I'm trying to make other than like there has to be a degree to which watching the product on the field is still the most enjoyable thing, right? And yeah, paying athletes is one thing and worrying about that. Like it can't get so granular that playing the actual game becomes secondary to enjoyment.
Yeah, and I also think, Kuz, again, thank you. I think you kind of summarized this. I do think the fans are forced to care about the money and the annoying parts of it
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's just the landscape today. I think that is the case. I think that's why people are covering it. I think that's why media are adapting to it. I think that's why it's put out in some press releases. I think that's why Country Road Trust exists, obviously, to deal with the money. I think that's why Ren Baker is bringing up in press conferences and continues to reiterate we're going to be fine in this respect. And then we did a whole show, Cody, on Ren Baker said this money will be fine, and then
Mhm.
turned around and hired a coach with only 2 years of D1 head coaching experience. That was part of my rant. Like what you're saying is not lining up. And part of that was the money conversation because Calhoun took way less to extend himself at Utah State than what WVU has been paying coaches. So a lot of that is money. I think where your program is even perceived at nationally, whether even above wins and losses, is where you are financially. So that's even how some programs turn around. I mean, Indiana was a laughingstock for football for a century. They got some money and now they're a national contender. I mean, that's the era we're living in. It does kind of suck, but that's just kind of the era we're living in. And maybe if you could have a scenario where you do the home and home and you just don't release and you tell Marshall, let's just keep it quiet on how the game. We'll split with you, but just don't tell anybody. Okay. But like it's gonna get out there. I do think, to summarize, the number one thing that has to go on in any conversation between Ren Baker, WVU, and Marshall, Rich Rod, Gibson, whoever's involved, actually, it has to be with Marshall being reasonable and understanding they want to play it. If they do, assuming they do, they have to understand the dynamics. That they have to understand it's not a fair dynamic. They're not,
Mhm.
West Virginia is not stupid, and I think they will admit this. They know, and I think you know this too, that if Marshall would ever win, they will put up a plaque. They will put up a statue. They will do a parade. They will brag about it for 100 years. And if West Virginia bragged about a win over Marshall, everyone would think they're a joke program. They would never be allowed to do so. So that is an unfair dynamic. So I think because of that, you have to do the 2-for-1. If you're doing a one-off, it got to be in Morgantown. You can't do the home and home. They got to get reasonable in that conversation, or else I don't think they're serious about wanting to do it. That's kind of where I lean. So basketball is maybe a different story.
Yeah. So I actually have a personal experience with something like this, and I'll go very briefly through this because nobody cares. When I was an undergrad at Slippery Rock, Slippery Rock has a rivalry trophy with Clarion University in Pennsylvania. They're in the same conference. They play every year. The trophy is a milk jug because that's cow country, right? And West Virginia had one every year, right? For 20 years or whatever, had one every year. Right. And it got to the point where me as a Slippery Rock student, I didn't even know that rivalry existed. I didn't know there was a trophy until working for the student newspaper, I found out about it. And eventually one year, through circumstances, Clarion won. And you know what Clarion did when they won? They threw an actual parade. They put a mural up in their bookstore of winning and displayed it proudly. And you know what happened when Slippery Rock won the next year? They took it back. They put it in whatever case it's in the basement, and they forgot about it. Yeah. Right. And that's exactly what you mean. Is like that is the year Marshall hypothetically would win. Is they would put up a mural, and they would do in the years West Virginia wins. Nobody cares. That's
just the dynamic that exists. Like even with downtime, when West Virginia won the Black Diamond Trophy, it's a big deal. Fans still talk about it. They displayed the trophy, etc. It'd be cool if they had a backyard brawl trophy in some way. You can't. You almost are not allowed to celebrate your win if you're West Virginia. You know what I mean? Like you wouldn't be able to perception wise. So I think that would suck. Like if you're Rich Rod and you're getting the troops ready, you would basically have to sell to them it's a state bragging rights. And then what if a kid turns around and says, I'm from Florida, I don't care? What would you say if you're Rich Rod? Try for me anyway? Like it wouldn't give you the gusto of beating Pitt or beating Virginia Tech, and it wouldn't do anything for the program. I could get, if you're going to play Ohio, why not play them? I could get different things. I also don't think, because some have brought this up too, that they think West Virginia should almost be the stewards of the state and needs to owe it to Marshall to give them a good attendance once a decade and to help them out as a program. I don't think West Virginia owes anything to Marshall. It is not their problem if Marshall cannot sustain themselves even when winning. But your exact example, West Virginia would have to put the trophy in a closet, whereas Marshall would have a parade. And that's a dynamic that it's hard from a WVU side. Because I'm trying to put myself into the alum and the student side as well, or the fan side beyond covering it. It would be hard to be excited. Like when I was in school, and actually they did play when I was in school. So when I was in school and they were playing Marshall, West Virginia was a great team. I'm from Pittsburgh. I'm a student at WVU. I certainly knew about WVU growing up, even though I was not from West Virginia. The Marshall game just was not on my radar like the other, like the brawl would be, or like Virginia Tech would be. And I can't even say I cared about it more than some of the non-rivalry games that were on the schedule. It just was another game. Like I just didn't grow up with any Marshall fan talking crap to me. Like I didn't have that little brother to bother me in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. And that's where, playing it every year for 7 years, I think was a big detriment, where, you've got to have novelty to it. You've got to have scarcity to it almost.
Right. I agree.
And I do think you said West Virginia couldn't celebrate. I know fans would talk smack. I know a lot of fans on Twitter would talk smack to Marshall.
They would talk smack probably. I don't know if they would talk as long, and I wouldn't do it next year. And I don't even. I mean, do you really? I don't know. I mean, they would talk smack, but like, do you think a Pittsburgh-born WVU alum is going to talk smack to Marshall for more than an hour?
I don't know. I mean,
that's what I mean. Like, I think
people talk pretty good smack about the baseball and the soccer.
I guess
matchup,
that does.
And I mean, the TBT, people got real mad about the TBT when they, if you remember
those
some of those hard
fouls. Those are good. Yeah, so those are nice, because this is also when the football game gets brought up occasionally. To have it in the other sports, it does help the argument for Marshall. There is intensity there that's a little different than just a regular game. But as I said at the open, I think they're more equal in those sports, so it also
Yeah,
helps a little bit. It's not like the football dynamic that exists. So, but yeah, no, it
yeah.
does become something in I mean, those sell out. Those are great attendance numbers, soccer, baseball, whatever.
And Daniel brought up in the chat just for men's basketball was
Yeah,
play the
playing
game in
golf.
Charleston right before Christmas break.
Yeah.
I think a great idea would be, they keep having this event at the Greenbrier, which I believe is West Virginia playing in that next year, Mike? I believe so.
The Greenbrier? Well, I mean, they're playing the Charleston Classic, but that's in South
Charleston,
Carolina.
yeah.
That's in
That's
South
right.
Carolina. Yeah.
Maybe Pitt's in the Greenbrier one. Anyway,
Pitt did play in the Greenbrier, I believe.
Okay, then that's what I'm thinking of. But yeah, so if the Greenbrier, and everything I've heard is it was a good event and people liked it.
Right.
I think schedule WV Marshall men in the Greenbrier thing that they're going to keep doing that would rule. Like that'd be a lot of. The problem is you can't sell as many tickets as people would want for that, right?
Right.
But that would be right before Christmas. If you could do something like that would be awesome. So yeah, Daniel, 100% that would rule.
Yeah, I mean that's also why it's a little easier to acquiesce a little bit in men's basketball because you could say like, okay, we're not going to do your place or my place. We'll do it at the Greenbrier. Like, let's compromise that way. In football, I mean, you got the two stadiums. Like, you're not like you can't say, let's play this, somewhere else. Like, that this is Morgantown is the big show.
Played it on Wheeling Island.
Yeah, you can add some. Yes, I mean, and I think the other issue too, which West Virginia fans would say, and West Virginia would say, maybe as a school, that anywhere that's not their home stadium, meaning of the Mountaineers, wouldn't be as big. So if your argument is like you're even saying now, you're going to have so many fans you can't even hold it. That Ren Baker, WVU would probably say, well, what do you mean? You're going to play somewhere where we can't even bring most of our fans because you can't even hold us? Like let's just come to Morgantown. We can hold everybody. And then they're going to say, well, I want the money. Like that's where the money ends up coming up. So maybe you can compromise something here, but yeah, Pitt did play at the Greenbrier though. I think it was either last season or the year before.
Yeah, I think it was this year. I think they played Wisconsin.
Which is weird to have them there and have WVU not there. Like I remember that did kind of feel odd to me.
But I've heard it's weird. That's one of those ballroom type things. It's weird to watch TV. I know a bunch of people that went and said it was like really cool for a Division I game to be played in there. But again, like it's not a lot of seats, so the ticket wise, I don't know if they would agree.
I mean, they've done cool things with Division I basketball. I mean, they played on
an aircraft carrier.
On an aircraft carrier, like they've done cool things like that. Yeah, you can do that, but you can't really have that much fun in football, obviously. And if you could play, I mean, the closest pro stadium would be Acrisure. It's not like you can play Marshall, West Virginia at Acrisure. That'd be pretty bizarre. So, like, you know what I mean? Or even if you want to go down to where the Bengals play, or in in Maryland, where DC plays, where the Commanders play, like. They did that. They did that with Maryland. Like you can kind of do that scenario, but that doesn't work with Marshall.
They played BYU out there, didn't they?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would be down again. I think you can fit this in, and it can be much easier to do. And I do not think the argument of it doesn't benefit us, the schedule, etc., is as valid in basketball because you have so many games. If the Ken Baum would say, well, you don't gain anything from that one win. Okay, like we're going to have the Big 12 schedule, which is loaded in another month, and we'll just pick up, some chances at solid Ken Baum in those games. And even if you lose to Marshall, I don't think it would be as much of the end of the world. But one Marshall football win would be celebrated forever for sure. So I think it's a little different dynamic, but the football dynamic, Wisconsin, Pitt, LSU, and UCF played there. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, at the Greenbrier. It would definitely be cool to see West Virginia there. It would be cool to see West Virginia Marshall there for sure. I don't see how this works in football unless they maybe do a one-off and it's in Morgantown. They do the 2-for-1. I don't think they're going to come off any of that stuff. I get Gibson bringing it up, and it prompted this show and others and my whole commentary. But it is a little annoying, and I don't want to hear this every week from Tony Gibson, which I'm scared we're going to.
You know what was interesting, Mike, and this will be real quick at the end here. I watched the latest Final Forecast episode where they announced Keidrian Johnson was joining West Virginia. And it was kind of funny. John Flowers actually talked about how much he liked playing Heard That in the TBT.
Yeah.
Right. And he literally said, like, most of those guys aren't Marshall, but we just liked playing because the fans get into it, right? And he talked about guarding what's the guy, John Elmore, is that his name?
Yeah, it was Elmore. Yeah.
And he talked about how much he likes
was real
guarding
good in
him
that.
because
Yeah.
and so when we talk about like I said, I'm more in the men's basketball side of playing Marshall, but like the juice is there, right? Like I don't think anybody would disagree. Like for men's basketball, right? Because of the schedule stuff, like the juice is there. I think with Huggins and D'Antoni gone,
Yeah.
I don't think it would take a lot to push to get that game back.
No, and those schedules also, as much as schedules are made years in advance, and in football they're 3, 4, 5, 6 years in advance. The basketball ones are very
basketball
fluid.
or not, yeah.
Very, very fluid. Like you could, I mean, being serious, if Ren Baker wanted to, and I'm not predicting this at all, they could find a way to get that on the schedule as recent as next year or the year after at the latest. Like there's room to move a basketball schedule all the time. That is a very fluid situation. Football wise, even if everybody would agree they got to play, it's 10 years from now.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, we'd be talking like 2035.
Right. Like Gibson, at that point wouldn't be the coach. And maybe whenever they do play, if they get a win, they can have a little thing on the statue. Like Gibson made this happen. Because like he wouldn't be the coach at that point. I would not imagine.
Maybe he'd be
so in the future. Yeah, like maybe he would be the WVU.
Maybe that's the long play. He'll succeed Richrod and then get the game back on.
Yeah, and I guess that would be funny. Marshall versus WVU in Blacksburg, or to have it like be a little thing going on in Blacksburg. Because I guess the other funny part about this is that sometimes Marshall fans do bring up Cody to give them a piece here at the end of the show. Marshall and Virginia Tech have a little rivalry going.
Yeah.
So like that is what they always bring up, that like, okay, WVU didn't want to do it with us in the same state. So now we just took on this, and we just it's almost like they forced a rivalry with Virginia Tech instead of West Virginia. So that is kind of a funny end of it, that Virginia Tech, a similar program to WVU, does not have the hang up. But I again do not think I think the level that Marshall would brag about a win over WVU would be higher than they are even bragging about Notre Dame. Like they would take that
absolutely,
to no
absolutely.
end. The risk that Virginia Tech has playing them is not to the level of West Virginia having to play them. It is just not even on the same wavelength for sure. It's a one-sided risk scenario, and it's not a fair dynamic. That is my problem. But I definitely think basketball-wise they could do it. Certainly, I think there would be intensity, there would be energy there, and it would kind of be cool. The other sports, you definitely got to keep it. But if I had to predict, I don't know if we're going to be seeing this. Do you think we see this in the next, I don't know, 10, 20? Like, do you think they play
football?
Yeah.
In the next 10 years.
Maybe I should go beyond because the schedule's all mapped out. But I'll ask this better, Cody.
Yeah.
Do you think Gibson's campaign, because that's what it freaking is, that's why I headlined it, that's what I'm calling it. Do you think Gibson's campaign and this conversation is going to be effective enough that Ren Baker is going to eventually have to sit there, or whoever is in charge, and be like, we got to call him, and then see what they want? Or do you, because to this point, there's been several years where the West Virginia perspective was, okay, we tried 10 years ago. Then we tried a few years later. You kept doing this home and home thing. So we're basically not even talking about it. Do you think Gibson's going to have enough success that they actually will entertain the conversation, and that if Marshall would hypothetically go to the one-off or go the 2-for-1, that you could see a release in 3 months that now in 2035 they are going to play? Do you think they're actually going to talk?
I think Gibson could get the ball rolling enough that I think it would take someone like a Joe Manchin really pushing this over the finish line again. Whoever that, if that's a future governor or whoever that ends up being, I think Gibson could get the ball rolling enough to get it to that kind of point where at least people, like, we're talking about it. Like, right? Like, when's the last time people talked about it like this, right? I think he could get the ball rolling enough. I don't think Tony Gibson could get it to the point, unless Marshall is really, really wanting this and really willing to make some concessions.
Yeah,
I don't think Tony Gibson himself could get this to the point where we're talking about contracts and phone calls and stuff. But I do think it could get to a point where, if he keeps this up for a couple years, I do think there could be some noise around the state, and then maybe whoever the governor is at the time maybe starts making calls, and maybe goes out somewhere and says, hey, wouldn't it be great if they, right? Because really, I mean, it's. I mean, I think Joe Manchin gets a lot of credit for the last time, right? And I think left to their own devices, WVU and Marshall maybe don't figure this out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of agree. If I had to predict, I don't think it's going to happen. I think there's I'm going to give it a 1% greater chance than it was before, just because also of the Rich Rod Tony Gibson connection. And as much as Ren is not going to take something that is a screw job, I don't think he's going to cave and do a home and home, nor will he go and do a one-off in Huntington and then not play for a decade. I don't think Ren will do that type of stuff, but I think he's at least a reasonable man enough that he would be willing to put the scenario. I think the way to be smart about this is, Cody, and I think Ren's smart enough to do this. What I would recommend, as much as I said ignore it, here's the other option if you don't want to ignore. I would be proactive a little bit, call, and I would really put them in a corner. And I would say, here is what we will do. Here is when we will do it. We are not debating this for 2 hours on the phone. This is what we will do. This is when we will do it. These are the options. We're on the phone. And if Marshall even wants to talk for more than 5 minutes, I would then say, okay, it's now on you. And I would find a way to publicly put this out there. We tried. They're unreasonable. It's their fault we're not playing. And I would flip it back on them. And then you would have to have Gibson stand there in the presser and be taking questions. You wanted this, and now your program is making this hard. And I would flip it back, because right now he has flipped it to a point that WVU looks like the bully who's being unreasonable, who won't want to play the little brother. Goliath doesn't want to play David. That's how it looks right now.
I don't think
I could flip it.
He hasn't really criticized WVU. Right? Like,
no, but I think it just looks that way. I don't think he's doing it on purpose, but I think it just looks that way.
Yeah, I don't want to, like, I think reading his comments, he just kind of talks about his own desire to play the game, right? Like, he's not to the point.
Yeah, no, I'm not. He's not. He's not.
Yeah,
on WVU. I agree.
Right,
no.
But the perception because of the big brother.
But I would try to flip it. Like I would get on the phone and say, we'll do this, and this. We're not going to do X, Y, and Z that you wanted 10 years ago when I wasn't here. I'm sorry. Yeah. And if you don't agree, then I would, whether it be a press release, whether it be a social media post, whether Ren Baker would make a joke to somebody in a quote that he sometimes does, maybe he would tell Tony Caridi, maybe he would tell Hoppy to put it out there, whatever he wants to do. I would find a way to put it out there so everyone in the state knows we tried. We were going to do the 2-for-1. They went home and home. We're Power 4. That's some bullshit, and we're not playing it.
Yeah, and that's kind of like that's what Penn State isn't even willing to do with Pitt, right? Where Penn State just completely shuts it down, right? Like I think even if you get to that point, Mike, where if West Virginia were to start talking about it, that would be a win for Tony Gibson, right?
Yeah, no, it would be.
Now you've got the big brother talking about it, at least.
But I would flip it back, because as much as you had the little brother, I think he would get a little bit of win in a PR situation. Yeah. But I'm tempted to believe that Ren Baker's smart enough that he could call their bluff, because he knows they only want this for one reason, and it's for their money and for their prestige. And I don't think they would agree to West Virginia's parameters. I don't think they would agree to it. So I think he would be able to flip it back, make them look bad for not agreeing, and then potentially, Cody, the negative, I guess, for people that want to see this game, if you handle it that way and Ren says, here's how we'll do it, they say no, you may kill it forever. Because if they say no again, then Ren may, if you call 3 years from now, Ren may say, no, now you're making me look foolish. I said I would do it before. You said no, it's out there. We're done with this. Like, this may be all chips to the center of the table for Gibson here if he gets a phone call. Like, that phone rings, they better figure it out how they're going to do what WVU wants. And I'm not sure they got that figured out before Gibson's talking in his press conferences. So that's the only thing. I think that is, I would potentially try to flip it and do that. And we will see where this goes. I get what Gibson's doing. It's a weird messenger a little bit there, but I do get what Gibson's doing. It makes sense from his perspective. But I mean, Ren Baker's even publicly said that if it was up to him, maybe he told me on my show, but I believe he's put this publicly and I publicized it, that if it was up to him with the whole COVID thing, do you remember when they played the game? It was really a road game, but it was a neutral location against Maryland, and then they lost early during the COVID year, and they lost the chance for that game to come back because of the COVID scheduling and all of that. I mean, Ren Ren told me when I had him on that he would have tried to get out of the game in the first place because he would have called Maryland and said, if the game in our place is getting screwed by COVID, we're not going to you. Like that was when you could get rid of schedules and you could easily tinker around because of COVID. And Shane Lyons just acquiesced and did whatever, and then didn't get a get back. I don't think Ren Baker is he's not gonna get played with. Like I don't think that's gonna work. So like they got to figure things out. But we didn't even really get to dig deeper into the roster. I do want to end the show now because we talked so much about WVU Marshall, which I figured this was an opportunity there that we maybe will not be talking about this again unless it continuously gets brought up because it has not really been a thing. So we were able to devote this show to it. So Gibson, you win in that respect there. I'm Tony Gibson. You get a W there. We did devote
his first win at Marshall.
Yeah, your first W at Marshall. You get a whole show devoted to you and a couple day worth of coverage and social media conversation devoted to you. So I maybe you win in that respect. And my last, I guess, call at the end here, just in general about the roster, Cody. And I know you weren't at all of these pressers, but I know you watched them and you've certainly been at them over the years. I know that it's a lot, and I'm not asking for national media to watch press conferences from programs. It's impossible, but we got to get to a point, and it may never happen. I guess it's never going to happen, where there is some care of actually being accurate. Like the entire scenario when the transfer portal opened, the national media absolutely, and I do some national writing. I'm not national media, but I mean, maybe I want to be there someday, but this is just reality. They are partly responsible for this, and it was just factually incorrect to the point of misreporting and exaggerating.
Absolutely.
I mean, the whole, honestly, there were even people that weren't in national media that were putting out mass exodus in their headline, and I think that was for SEO purposes. We run a digital platform. I know why you're doing it. You get more clicks doing it than what I was actually saying, but it's just factual. It's borderline lying. I mean, that is the extreme that I could accuse. Rich Rod, at least 4 times in a press conference at minimum, and I should find the clips and just throw all this out there, said, we are going to make cuts. It's going to be a big number. I don't want to do it. It's to get under this bar. I've been talking to Big 12. I've been trying to argue it. And really what annoys me, he said he was on Big 12 calls talking about this, and some of the national media members, because I jump on them sometimes, are on those calls. They hear it, and then they go ahead and write the mass exodus, or you get the big eyeballs and the emoji of, oh, they lost 30 players in 2 hours. 99% of those players were cut.
Yeah.
I don't like having to embarrass these players. I know from the program the reason why they almost should. I told them directly they should do this. They don't want to do this because it's embarrassing to the players, but they almost need to release an actual press release. We're cutting these players. Yeah. They don't want to do that because it's not nice, but by not doing it, these players did not want to admit being cut. They put their little tweet up saying that, oh, we're just choosing to go to the transfer portal 3 weeks after. They were cut. They were cut. They were cut to get under a roster limit. You can argue whether the team's going to be good or bad, or whether they should cut them, what it means, all of that. But they were cut. Yeah. There was like 3 players that maybe left that weren't supposed to leave. There's not been a starter yet that has left that wasn't supposed to leave. The number's high, but they were all cut. Most of them were cut. And that was really just getting to be in my craw that whole day. That was just really a pet peeve and was really, really annoying. And national media was part of it. And there were even some WVU fans that were trying to troll and take it to another limit. And it's just ridiculous. It was clearly out there. These players were cut. They did not leave all within an hour in some mass exodus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Mike, you and I talked about it, I think, on last week's show.
Multiple times.
We went through all, and I believe you and I specifically said, like, the fan base is handling this really well, right? Like it hasn't been, and you're like, I think there was one time Rich Rod literally said, hey, we're probably going to get rid of 20 guys. Like he gave
the number was out there 100%. Yeah.
And then like, I forget what day it was last week that all the guys disappeared off the roster and we reported on, here's the guys that are gone. But then all of a sudden, for some reason this week, it was big news. Like, and you're right. Like I saw a bunch of the national outlets like putting up like, is there something wrong in Morgantown? Right? Like narratives like that. And it's like, we knew this was going to happen. Like everybody has said this was going to happen. This already happened. It didn't happen this morning. It happened last week.
Right.
Like it was so bizarre. And that happens occasionally. Like when you cover a team and then it does go to the national, you see all the little things that they don't know what they're talking about. Like even when I watch basketball games on ESPN Plus,
Yeah.
I can tell when the announcers don't know what they're talking about, right? But something like this is like, what do you like? Nobody. It's like you see, 20 guys in the transfer portal with West Virginia, and if you're a national reporter, you're like, oh, that's a story, right? That's a ton of guys. But if you Google it for 5 seconds, you see that like, oh no, this already happened, and it's not a story, and it was bizarre, and I do put a lot of blame on the national outlets that didn't do homework on it and wanted a headline and wanted a reaction picture, just put it up, and then I think a lot of the vast majority of West Virginia fans I saw didn't take the bait. I know some, probably the people that don't like Rich Rod no matter what.
They're mostly the trolls, but the trolls really fed into it. I mean, there are some that claim they're fans,
yeah.
but really just hate on the program all the
But
time.
that was
They're really
just,
just trolls,
that was just,
that was just crazy disappointing.
It was just, on the national level, it was bad journalism from a lot of outlets who want clicks and just didn't do homework, right? Like didn't do the legwork that you and I do every day and all the guys on the beat do every day, and just saw something and knew they could make a headline that would get clicks, so they did it. And I don't know, it's frustrating. It's frustrating for us, I think, to see that.
Yeah, that was really, really frustrating, especially because I went back and looked at every time I would see one, I would go back and look at my initial story. Like, was this player already on this?
Yeah.
Was this a cut?
Yeah.
And I believe I had 25. So if you're saying there's a total of 30, then we had a few individual articles after that. There were some surprises, like Gavin Crawford was one. There was a couple others.
Like Jacoby
Spells, I believe, was one that was later. He was kind of weird. Even Jack Samarka, who I actually to this day do not think he actually even announced what he's doing. He's just off the roster. He was very confusing because at the time when there were other tight ends who were cut. So when he was not cut, the perception was, oh, maybe he actually, won a spot. There were some actually were kind of trying to report that he won a spot. We didn't go that far, but there were some saying that. Yeah. And then that looks ridiculous, obviously, because then he's off the roster. He has not said really what happened. So again, Crawford, Samarka, Onrika was one that I heard from him and others and, different people that, okay. And he put his opinion out there that they dispute whether he was cut or not. Okay, but like what I'm saying here is, because we can argue about whether you're cut or not all day. The only people who really do know is you and Rich Rod in that meeting, and outside of then what was thrown to us in media off of the list. But we're arguing about 3 or 4 guys. There's 30 people that left the roster.
Yeah,
I mean 90% of them were cut. Again, it was just really, really, really lazy. It was really lazy. It was almost like there were some people nationally that were looking, okay, I know every time there's a portal open, some program can look ridiculous. Who is it this week? Yeah. Oh, shit, it's West Virginia. Oh, man, I'm excited. Oh, man, emoji here, picture here, graphic here. Oh, article there with 3 words. Wow, look at the engagement come in.
And then, headline, problems in Morgantown, or something. It's like, come on.
Yeah, like that. And I think the only, I don't know if they care or not, actually. I know there were some annoyed with the program, but the only other thing that stung them a little bit, and the only way to avoid it a little bit, is moving the spring game back or the showcase back to where everybody else has it. They had it so early that when we were reporting the 25 players out of this 30 that became the total number, nobody nationally was really focused in on spring games or showcases being over. They thought practices were still going on. I think some of them thought West Virginia was not even done when they were done. Like, they were done way, way early. 3 weeks earlier than Neil Brown used to finish. Even a week before the programs that used to do it first, because Pitt for decades would usually end there's a week before West Virginia, and this year was a week after, for example. So they did it so early that you tell the media, okay, these are the players that were cut. We put it out there, and then the portal's not open. So you give those players room to then release their statement that some exaggerated the truth. I will say, sorry. Some, put out their statement, thanks to everybody, and now we're going in the portal. But they had their time to put out their statement. So some people were seeing it 2 weeks later. Oh, man, Terry's in the portal. Oh, man, this player's in the portal. Oh, man, Abe Fenwick's in the portal. Or maybe Judah Price is in the portal. Or this. And it's like they were cut 2 weeks ago. they're in the portal now because the portal is just open now. So maybe you need to have your event a little closer to when the portal opens, because if you release your list and then a day later it's okay, we're connecting the dots, versus that separation of time. That's the only thing.
Yeah.
But if you're a media member, whether you're national or local, the onus is on you to do a Google search to know what's going on. And I'm not saying you got to study WVU as much as people who are covering the program every day. But if you're going to write a headline that is going to say something that is basically an opinion-centered headline, or ask a question like, what is the problem in Morgantown? You need to first know if there actually is one, or you're making something up. Like that should be part of journalism, 100%.
And to Rich Rod's credit, he couldn't have been more transparent about this. That this was going to, like, guys were going to be off the roster after the spring game, right? Like like you mentioned, like there's a bunch of clips of him just straight up saying, yeah, after the spring game, guys are going to be off the roster. And it's I don't know. It's not news. It wasn't news. I don't know. It's frustrating about it. And then you see like stuff like that, gets all the hits, and we've had it for a week, and it's just, God, that's part of the business that just, that always, I mean, you and I used to always joke, Pete Thamel would come in Saturdays before game. We joked this year, he would tweet something like, Garrett Green may or may not play today. And it's like, okay, well, we reported that on Tuesday. Right, but
or like anyone could really say that, like may or may, like he was the king of the may or may not. It's like may,
but it's like the local guys had that news on Tuesday, but Pete Thamel tweets it Saturday morning, so it becomes a national news, right?
Yeah,
and it's like
he gets credit for breaking it, right?
That kind of stuff just gets annoying. It just for us local guys, it just gets annoying.
Yeah, I mean that gets annoying, but I mean I almost have realized like that's just the way of the world.
Yeah,
the national guy's always going to get the credit on like any beat in the world. The national guy is going to get credit for breaking news. The only people that really get credit nationally for breaking news in the world are really Pete Thamel in college and Adam Schefter in the pros. It doesn't mean that Adam Schefter is literally breaking every single news 100% of the time. There's sometimes that, for example, our colleague Alan Saunders at Steelers Now will have a Steelers news before Schefter, but if Schefter gets it a second later, he's going to get the credit. Alan's not going to get that credit. That's just the way it is. The other end of it that I think is worse is what happened with the West Virginia roster, is when it really feels like national media are either not doing research or borderline lying. I mean, it's one thing if you're breaking news that's over somebody else and you get credit when they should. It's another thing when you're making it up. I mean, that is a whole nother level. I mean, that again, 30 players did not walk into the built facility and flip off Rich Rod and say this is a big problem in Morgantown. That is not what happened. About 25 of them wanted to still be on the team, were kicked off the team, were cut. And again, I don't think I understand the opinion of not wanting to embarrass those players, but it doesn't make the program look good being this nice. This is not a nice world we're living in. The NFL doesn't do this stuff. The NFL will let you know, like, we cut this guy. The coach will say it in the presser. He's cut. They'll put it in the release, like this player was released. Once we get to contracts, and this is a whole nother situation, but Cody, I think we'll get there at some point. Whenever we get to contracts, yes, that'll stop the player movement. You won't be able to be a free agent twice a year. If you have a contract for 2 years, you won't be able to leave after 1 year. That'll be like the pros, because in the pros, you're not a free agent twice a year. You're a free agent whenever your contract's up. So whenever we get to contracts, that means there's going to be some times where you're not going to be nice, and you're going to put a press release and you're going to hit send and say, X player has been released. X player has been cut. X player has been waived. You're going to have to say that to let everyone know this player's not screwing me. We are telling them to leave. Like that is what
I mean, doing. I think this just happened with the Tennessee quarterback, Mike. I think it was the first instant of it,
right? Publicly,
where Tennessee, I mean, pretty transparently was like, "We're not playing games. He's gone." Right? Like, and we all know it was money stuff, right? So I think we just saw the very first one, and definitely not the last one.
Yeah, and I think as much as Cody, if you think we're frustrated covering it, imagine how frustrated the coaches are. I mean, I would bet you, and we haven't talked to Rich Rod. I bet you Rich Rod Cody, he kept saying it so open, like you're saying, for a reason. They thought they could avoid this. I imagine that when they saw what was going on in the open of the winter portal for football, I imagine that Rich Rod and people with that program that we know, I imagine they were not happy because they were putting a real effort in to make this very clear what was going on. And to some credit, including even rival fans and media and fans, once I would have to reply and say, no, these players were cut. Here's a link of my original story. It's 90% of these players. There's like 3 players that, weren't cut that left. Then you get, oh, okay, well, it is what it is then. Well, it is what it is. But like the original comment that you made, it's already gone out there and I haven't seen that deleted just yet. So it is what it is. So yes, you may have to get more and more direct. They did do that because what we do know for sure that whether a program's successful or not, over the years of the transfer portal, it has worked both ways. There have been times where, yes, players have screwed over programs and then dragged them through the mud. There have Messidors, for example, early in the Brown tenure. There have also been times where West Virginia sat down a kid and told him it's best for you to hit the transfer portal and get out of here. And that even includes the Neil Brown tenure. Cortez Braham was a story that I broke during that.
That's who I was going to say.
Because nobody knew, like, that was weird. Like, why was he randomly off the team? And Brown didn't want to talk about it. And then he wasn't there for a while, and he was at the Penn State game. And if you remember going into that season, the whole off season, Neil Brown would say in that the receiver coach, they all would say, oh, we're going to expect a lot out of Cortez Braham, and he's going to be part of this. And he was talking to us, and then all of a sudden he's not there. And then I, was able to break the news and talk to him that he basically told the coach, I want to get more playing time. How can I get more playing time in there? And they told him, no, we have nothing else for you. I think it's best for you to hit the portal. And they locked him out of the facility. and so that's, I'm not even trying to criticize Brown or the coaching staff. It's shrewd business. That's treating them like pros. Okay. You want this role. We don't have it for you. We have this role. You just told us that if you don't get X role, you're not going to be happy. So our answer to you is you're off the team. Like that was basically what happened there. So that does go on a lot. And that's not Cortez Braham, screwing over the program. That's him being kicked off the team and then being locked out of facility and having to, figure out a way to go get his bag that was put in. Like, it was a whole thing. So like those things 100% happen. And yeah, we're seeing that on a much larger level nationally with Nico there and what happened with Tennessee due to money. And even Syracuse, Fran Brown told a receiver, I'm not going to pay you $2 million to be a receiver on the team. And he had his leading receiver leave because of that. And Fran Brown's talking about that. And he wants to have caps at different positions that Rich Rod brought up. So I think we got to start doing that more and more, that instead of Neil Brown, because he was trying to be nice. He's a nice guy, as we know. He didn't want to do a press conference and say Cortez Braham told me this, so I booted him off the team. He wanted to be nice to the kid. And what did that get him? It got him embarrassed because a media member broke some news and then he looked like crap for a week. I think the better solution, if you're going to be pro ball, throw a release up and be like, Cortez was here. We mutually agreed to, part ways. And if you want to say, because, whatever, man, or we're releasing him or we're cutting him or, it got to go both ways. If the kids want to negotiate new deals a week after they signed the first deal, then you got to be able to play hardball back with them and be like, okay, you want this. We only see you for here. It's no different than any other job. I mean, sometimes if you ask for a raise in a company and the company is like, I don't think so, they might answer instead of I don't think so, we're just done with you altogether. Like that happens in the workforce.
That so maybe happened to one of us, Mike.
Now that but like that happens. So like that's Cortez Braham basically is what happened with Cortez Braham. So yeah, like that. Put that out there though. Put that out there from the program. They should just release here 25 players that were cut off the roster. Yeah. I mean, when do you ever see a scenario, even like say the Steelers are heavily covered, but like the Jacksonville Jaguars, like nationally, they're almost never on the radar. When do you ever see misreporting or lying? They don't do that because Schefter gets the press release and okay, they cut this guy. Okay, well, I'm not going to be able to say that he wants to screw them and they're screwed that way because they cut him. I'm not going to talk about him because of the Jaguars. Nobody cares, but I'm not going to lie either. Like, it just doesn't. You need to start treating yourself in that way, like a pro organization, to maybe avoid that. But that was really, that was really ridiculous. Because that was, yeah. I mean, I was refusing. I don't care what other colleague. I was waiting to see what other people would do, but like I was sticking to my guns. I was not about to write 25 stories over again because some kids were going to lie, and because I was like, I'm not doing it. I did the original report is what it is. They were cut off the team. I'm sorry they don't like it. I'm sorry their family doesn't like it. I'm sorry that people are saying different things out there online. Here on Earth is what happened. So we will see. Moving on. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Again, you can find Mountaineer Report everywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc., and on YouTube. And you can find all of our Mountaineer coverage, including debates and actually including some Marshall coverage because we are West Virginia Sports Now and not just WVU Sports Now. So got some Marshall coverage actually as well at WVSN.